大家好. We're here at West China Tea, and today we are going to talk about what I think is one of the most essential aspects of Gong Fu cha, and that something that gets right to the heart of what Gong Fu is. When we talk about Gong Fu cha and we refer to it referring to skill acquired through mindful practice, one of the most important aspects of that is being adaptable and being able to listen to the tea and respond to it and adapt the way that we're steeping it. Because when we get a tea from a merchant or even from as a gift from a friend or wherever we get some tea, that tea has its own way of being, its own personality and identity. And all you might know about it is what kind of tea it is. It's a green tea, it's an oolong. You might know where it's from more specifically. You might know what style, but you can never know exactly how that tea is going to want to be steeped to taste and smell and feel exactly the way that you want it to taste and smell and feel. So today, I'm going to go through the 6 different types of tea, asterisk, which we'll get to. And I'm going to come at them kind of incognito. I'm going to approach them as though this is my first time trying this tea. And all I know about it is what type of tea it is. Is it green? Is it yellow? Is it oolong? Is it red tea? And I'm just going to be like I'm a little tea squirrel out in the wild, wandering through the forest of Yunnan, and I stumble across some leaves and I'm like, is this tea? What kind of tea is it? How do I steep it? And I'll narrate my process as I do that, and I'll tell you what it is that I'm thinking when I'm making a decision about how I'm steeping that tea with respect to specifically time and temperature. Because the truth of the matter is that I steep tea now very, very differently than when I was a young tea squirrel. I steep tea very differently. I actually don't control the time and temperature very much, or definitely the temperature less. And that's because I have developed my pouring technique. But when you're first exploring tea, you're controlling the time and the temperature. Those are the main things that you're controlling. They're the easiest to control. Those are the gross controls. And then you've got the more subtle controls of the pouring technique. And that's not what this episode is about. This episode is for the wee tea squirrels out there making their way through the mountains, trying to figure out, I bought this tea, it's kind of expensive, I don't want to waste it. Am I doing it wrong? Does it taste bad? Is it supposed to taste bad? Is it supposed to taste like water? How do I make it not taste like water? And so we're going to go ahead and put on our squirrel tails and dive into this episode. I'm going to start by getting my tea set ready. Just a very brief review for anyone who is not familiar with all this stuff and what we're doing. This is a gaiwan. It's a lidded bowl. I'm going to use this today because it's a good essential tool for making tea. It's got a nice, big, open, bright, visible, accessible chamber, and you can see the tea and you can smell the leaves. You can smell the underside of the lid and stir it, etc. And so this is a good tool to explore tea with. I've got teapots that belong to these types of tea that we could be using, but for the purpose of y'all getting to see this and having it be a good uniform process, I'm just going to use my gaiwan today, my lidded bowl, which is going to give me a lot of control over what I'm doing. Although, like I said, we're not going to be controlling the pour. We're just going to be controlling time and temperature for the most part. We're going to probably cheat a little bit. And then my gong da bei, my fairness cup or justice cup. Ooh, I'm going to get this. Ooh, yeah. Been waiting to do that. And then we're going to drink a green tea. Green tea is probably the most intimidating tea for a lot of people because it is so bitter. It can be. It doesn't have to be bitter, but it can be bitter. And I think most people have had the experience of drinking bitter green tea. It's not hard to make green tea bitter. And so we are going to approach it gingerly and tenderly and delicately. And we're not going to want to use too hot of water. We're not going to be too vigorous with our pour. We're not going to steep it too long. This is something new that I've been doing, and I'm going to go ahead and just make it. It can make its public debut right now. But for green teas, there's a couple things that make the tea stronger, and one of those things is how vigorous you're pouring the water on the tea. And so, sometimes you'll see people pour the tea onto the water. This is what they do in Chengdu. You go to a tea house in Chengdu, they bring you a glass of water, hot water, and you pour your little packet of leaves right onto it. And so we'll go ahead and do that this time. This is just me exploring. Why is this good? One is that I can pour the water and kind of let it sit. And if you've taken the intro class, you're familiar with this technique of smelling and feeling the water. The smell of the tea is how it communicates with us before we can taste it. And so just getting an idea, does that feel too hot? Okay, well, I don't know. I haven't developed that sense, but I'm just gonna go ahead and leave the lid off. I'm gonna pour the leaves on like that and let the leaves sink down into the gaiwan. And this is good and delicate because you see there's a bunch of the leaves that are just kind of dry. They're just entering the water at their own pace and they're unlikely to oversteep. And I've got my lid off, I'm letting it breathe. So even if it was hot, a little bit hot at the beginning, it's quickly cooling down. And that kind of, I get to cover my bases and hedge my bets a little bit because if it likes hot water, then it was hot at the beginning. But if it doesn't like hot water, at least it quickly cools down and hopefully won't make it too bitter. And I'm just gonna do a little taste. Now, this is the rinse, right? But you can taste it. You can even drink it if you want to. But it's very useful when you're learning about tea and discovering a tea to taste the rinse because that will tell you where it's going. So let's say I'm serving tea to a big group of people and it's my first time serving a given tea. If I taste the rinse, then I might be able to surmise where I'm wanting that tea to go, right? I'm like, okay, I taste these notes in the rinse, and so I'm going to do this because I want to bring out these aspects. We'll talk about that a lot more later, but that's one of these kind of overarching principles that I'm using when I'm exploring tea is that tasting and smelling the tea can inform my actions moving forward. Sometimes things will smell like they want hotter water or will taste like they want hotter water. And of course, the general principle with time and temperature is that the higher the temperature, the longer the time, the more concentrated the tea will be. The lower the temperature, the shorter the time, the less concentrated the tea will be. And so that's just this principle that we're going to apply across the board. Another thing that I'm looking at when I'm approaching this tea that, again, I'm just going to imagine I don't know what this tea is. It's got little leaves. It's not like a big leaf tea. It's got these little bitty leaves. And I find that tea with little leaves also doesn't want to be steeped with as hot water or as long. Sometimes they want to be hot water, sometimes they'll want to be long, but usually not both. And so this is, I'm erring on the side of caution. I'm doing it with cooler water. I'm doing it for a shorter time. I didn't cool my water here this time. I cooled it in my gaiwan and then poured the leaves on top of it. And so I'm going to taste it. It's good. It's a little bit bold. It's not bitter, but I can taste that it could easily become bitter. So I'm going to be more particular about cooling my water this time. But if it didn't taste strong, if it tasted a little bit soft, I would have made a different choice. So that's kind of the main takeaway that I want you, the viewer, to take away from this episode is that there's no recipes for how you make every given kind of tea. It's all about this exploration. So let's try it. That was the rinse. Now I'm gonna properly cool my water. What else do I know about this tea? I know that it's got a lot of buds. I could see when it was dry that it had a lot of fuzzy downy buds. That means that it's going to be probably lighter in flavor than a tea that's got a lot of leaves. So that's, even though the leaves are small, it's very buddy. So I can count on it for Chinese teas for the most part with more buds having a lighter flavor, less tannic flavors, less acidic flavors. All right, so I've got my water a little cooler now. And I'm gonna be really fast this time because I'm like, okay, that was a little bit stronger than I wanted it to be. So I'm also gonna look at the color. This is a good color for green tea to be. It's like a pale green color. It's not orange or red. If you've got green tea that's orange or red, either the tea is old and stale and expired, or you steeped it way, way, way too strong, and you definitely should not drink it because it will hurt you. See what I did there? I'm smelling the lid. That gives me an idea for the progression of the tea. So staying in contact with the tea, I'm gonna go ahead and pour some for our example. I like this color of this steeping, so I'm gonna pour some here. I'm gonna taste it again. Making tea well is always, in every session that you're making tea well is always a process. It's never something that is achieved. It's an ongoing process. From one steeping to the next, what steeping 1 could be or can be is not the same as what steeping 3 could be or can be. Your goals with each steeping are not the same. It's like a dance where you need to be sensitive to where your partner is moving and wanting to be moved. That's really nice. So what was going to be this bitter taste that I could taste coming into the rinse? And the rinse overall was soft in flavor because it's the rinse, it's the first steeping, and it doesn't have a lot of juice in it yet because the leaves are still getting woken up. But what was there, I could taste that there was this bitterness, not really outright, but just kind of lurking. And having cooled my water more and steeped it faster, now I'm getting this really nice umami, this rich, grassy, seaweedy kind of umami instead of that bitterness. But it's in the same spot where the bitterness would have been. And so that's, if you're just using a gaiwan, there's lots of different ways to steep green tea. You can steep it in a glass. You can, steep it in a songhu or something like that. But if you're using a gaiwan, if you're using this tool to explore tea, this is how I'd be doing it, is I would be cooling my water down. Whether you pour the leaves on the water or not doesn't matter. You can pour the water on the leaves, you can pour the leaves on the water. To me, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. But I think the more important thing is to cool your water, taste your rinse, and then err on the side of caution with green tea specifically, because once it's made bitter, it's very difficult for it to come back from that bitterness. All right. So let's move on to the next tea. We've got a red tea. And this is where I'm gonna cheat and give you guys a little bit of pouring technique now, because this is just something I really like to do for red tea, which is to give the leaves a little soak instead of a hot rinse. I give them a hot soak. This is called Jinrun Pao, soaking steep. And it's something I learned in Guizhou, and I like it for red teas. I like it for a couple other teas. This does kind of qualify as pouring technique. If you want to learn more of this, then you can take advanced class. But for the purposes of today, let's just say it's a way to wake the tea up without throwing away the rinse. And in this case, it's going to allow the tea to wake up to a point where we can smell it and we can see the color, which is more relevant for red tea than it is for green tea, for example. Because with red tea, most red teas can be steeped at boiling hot temperatures, or a lot of red teas can be steeped at boiling hot temperatures, and that's how people all over the world tend to like to drink them. But they do have these complex, spicy, fruity, sweet, sugary, sweet potato notes and chocolatey notes that they can have. And sometimes being more delicate with the temperature or the pour will bring those things out. But today we're gonna focus on the temperature and the time. And so I'm gonna go ahead and give them just a little bit of water here. When you do this soaking steep, not only are you helping to saturate the leaves, which is the purpose of the rinse, you're also helping to make what's called the jindian, the golden drops, which is this concentrated syrup of tea that are the last few drops that cling to the leaves in the pot, in the gaiwan, wherever. It's these very concentrated drops of tea that are clinging to the leaf mass, and you have to wring them out, shake them out to get them out. And when you do this Jinrun Pao, you are creating that. And so I'll go ahead and give you another little look. And I'm not worried about the time right now because this water is saturated. That's as much of this red tea juice as it can hold. And now I can take my hot water and smelling it, woken up like that is gonna inform me. I'm moving forward, I'm gonna say, I like those notes that I was getting, those sweet potato notes, those sugary notes, the hay notes, the size of the leaf, I'm gonna say, let's go ahead and use hot water. And so the risk is that it could be bitter, right? Red tea can get bitter, it can get astringent. So if I made the wrong choice, then it's gonna be bitter. But if I had made it cooler, then the risk would have been that it wouldn't open up and I would be missing out on some of that character, some of that flavor. There's no such thing as smelling the tea too much. I'm not gonna treat this as a rinse because I did that Jinrun Pao and that basically did the same thing that the rinse would do, which is get the leaves saturated. So I'm just gonna go ahead and drink this. I'm gonna give it a smell. Yeah, a lot of those oaky notes come out. A lot of those sweet brown sugar comes out. Yeah, really oaky, surprisingly oaky. That's the oakiest I've probably ever had this tea. And so moving forward, going on, I can go a couple different ways. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty satisfied with that. That was pretty good. I got a lot of those notes that I was smelling out of there. But what if I cool my water? Just because it's a red tea doesn't mean we can't cool our water. You can always cool your water. I used to cool my water for every tea. I used to cool my water pretty much for every different tea. Like I said, now I almost never cool my water, but I used to do it for pretty much every tea. And that helped me learn a lot about tea because sometimes you discover that a tea that says to do it at high temperature on the bag, when you do lower the temperature, you get these subtle notes that come out. Or when you lower the temperature specifically on the second steeping or the fourth steeping, or somewhere where it's really starting to peak and then you lower the temperature, then you get these subtle notes and they can be really complex notes like vanilla or something like that. These custardy notes, these floral notes. And those can come even out of teas that we think of as being dark teas. So never be afraid to experiment with any given tea, especially, okay, I did the Jinrun Pao, I smelled it, I was listening to the tea, I smelled it, I followed my instincts and used hot water based on the size of the leaves and the fragrances I was getting. I got a good steeping. I can keep on that tack, knowing that it's not gonna be the same again and again and again. It never is. Even if I keep all of the factors the same, the time, the temperature, exactly the same, it's a different tea now. It's been steeped more times. And so I'm gonna experiment with it this time and see what happens when I use a little bit cooler water and go longer. I'm kind of pouring from high up. There we go. Try not to talk about pouring technique. I just love pouring on this mushroom. I'm worried it's gonna get under the tray, it's gonna annoy me, but it hasn't yet, So here, this is the great thing about a gaiwan. I can look at the leaves. I can smell the underside of the lid. I'm getting these peachy, appley notes now that just weren't there at all before. I didn't get any of that before. Oh, I lost a leaf. It's gonna drive me nuts. All right, that's fine. It's wabi-sabi. All right, and I can be a little bit more generous with the time now that my water's cooled. Ooh, beautiful color. I'm gonna go ahead and, since this is a red tea, do a little reverse pour here. And I'm just gonna take another little look at the leaves and smell at the leaves before I taste this. And how has it changed? It still smells like oak and brown sugar. I'd say the smell of the leaves has not changed that much. Beautiful saffron liquor. Ooh, it's definitely different. And I wouldn't even say it's necessarily weaker. I'd say that where the flavor is moved up in the mouth, closer to the front of my mouth. I'd say that it does have more of those fruity notes. Like those dried apples that are not quite dried and they're still kind of soft. and maybe some kind of like chestnut note. But it's different. It's pretty different. And that's what happens when we are willing to explore and experiment, is that we can learn things about a tea that we wouldn't otherwise. And that's not just informing me about this tea, that's informing me about all red teas. I've learned something about all red teas, that sometimes there's this hidden aspect. If I can let myself explore cooling my water, then I can find notes that I didn't know were there before. I didn't even know about those notes because I always use hot water on this tea. So there we go. I'm learning something in this episode. Go ahead and also I'll mention that red teas tend to be less likely to have that drying astringency than green tea. This is one of the reasons why you see them used in this big pot format. For example, in Turkey or in the UK or in Ireland, you have these big pots and you've got a bunch of red tea, AKA black tea, in them, and they're just sitting there and they're steeping. And the reason that they can do that with those is because red tea, because it's oxidized, has a lot less of that like mouth drying, puckering astringency that you get from oversteeped green teas. And so you can be a little bit more generous with the time and with the temperature with these teas. They tend to be a little bit more forgiving, but they can definitely still get very astringent and bitter. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this guy out. Switch up to oolongs. This is, we started with green tea and red tea because those are the most common types of tea that people drink. And oolong is getting a little bit into the nature of what makes these teas different from each other, at least these first four, which is the oxidation level. Green teas are fully unoxidized, red teas fully oxidized, oolongs are somewhere in the middle oxidized. And if you want to know more about that, you can go back to previous seasons of the show. But suffice it to say that we're going to do oolong next. We're going to do a oolong's so variable. It's very difficult to say what you should do with an oolong because oolongs can be low oxidation, they can be high oxidation, they can be medium oxidation, they can be straight little twisted leaves, they can be rolled into little balls like this one here, they can be pressed into a pillow, right? So there's actually not a lot that can meaningfully be said about oolongs as a category, except this. Most of them can be steeped with pretty hot water as long as you keep your time under control. And so another thing to be said about them is they're all very fragrant. That's the nature of oolongs, is that they're very fragrant and they exhibit this broad range of different fragrances, which is why you have all these different cultivars and varietals like Da Hong Pao and Milan Xiang and Tie Guan Yin and all those are just the famous ones, all these other ones, right? And so when you're making an oolong, they're usually made from the bigger, older leaves. So as we talked about before, bigger leaves are going to be harder to burn. They're going to be more able to take heat and more able to take time, and they're going to need some heat and they're going to need some time to fully unfurl, especially if they're rolled up or roasted, which this one is both. I can see just by looking at it. Maybe I wouldn't know that, but a general rule of thumb is the darker the color, the more roasted and oxidized it is. The lighter the color, the lower the oxidation level is. And as for what we're going to do when we steep them, I'm just going to give myself a little rinse here. As for what we're going to do when we steep them, like I said, oolongs are very diverse, but here's a few things that I would do when approaching something that gets called oolong and I don't know anything else about it. And I can't identify it. Remember, I'm not Sohan here. I'm just a tea squirrel that doesn't know words or language. I just know what I like. And here's what I would do. First, of course, smell the leaves. I smell them dry and cold. Now I'm gonna warm them up. Smell them warm and dry. Look at them, connect with them. Just, what do they feel like? What do they feel like they're gonna want? And then, because it is a rolled oolong, I'm definitely going to rinse it. I'm not going to drink the rinse. I will taste the rinse, like I said, for the same purposes as before, to give me sort of a point of reference for what this tea is doing and what kind of notes can be there. The rinse is like a preview The show hasn't started yet, but it's a little bit of a preview of what the show is going to be like. And so I'm going to give it a rinse. It's dark, so that means it's probably roasted. So I'm going to give it a nice hot rinse because those roasted oolongs usually need heat, like I was saying before, and need a little bit of time. The leaves aren't huge. They're rolled up, so they're a lot bigger than they look. But even knowing that they're rolled up, they're not huge leaves. So I'm not going to steep it too long. And in this case, I'm not steeping it shorter because I'm worried about getting bitter. Because most oolongs don't get bitter, Phoenix oolongs do. And we'll talk about that in just a second. We're not going to go into that level of detail for this particular episode because you might not know if it's a Phoenix oolong or whatever. We're going to give it a smell. Very important. This is the most important smell, is the warm, wet smell. I get chocolatey notes. I get charcoal notes. I get baked good, kind of salted caramel brownie sort of notes. And then I'm getting that charcoal. I'm getting that ashy character also. Those are both there. And I'm gonna go ahead and give myself my little taste, give some to the shroom. I might have to keep this mushroom. This is my buddy now. Not much flavor at all, but I get some fragrance. A rich, roasty fragrance, maybe some notes of roasted grain. It does taste good and it feels good. It's got a mouthfeel to it. And so I'm gonna say, okay, that boiling hot water didn't seem to do any harm to it on this pretty fast and robust steeping. Let me go ahead and first smell it again, because it's gonna change as it's sitting there soaking up the water and cooling down. I'm getting some more almost like bready notes, like doughy, bready, yeasty notes on this one. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna repeat what I did this time because it was so soft on the rinse that I'm just gonna keep going with boiling hot water or whatever this is. As hot as I can get it right this particular second. And I'm even gonna lean in, I'm gonna do a little bit longer because I see that the little balls that it is has not unfurled all the way. They've unfurled a little bit, and that tells me that I'm not in risk of this being the peak of this tea where it's gonna be really, really strong. Now, if this was an unrolled oolong, if this was a straightened or more straight oolong, that twisty oolong, like you see in the Phoenix Mountains, like you see in the Wuyi Mountains with the Dancongs and the Yancha, then it would be as though the leaves had already unfurled, and then I'd be steeping it much faster. But this one, because that first rinse was so soft, ooh, look at that color. That first rinse was so soft, and because the leaves are rolled like that, and I know that because they're curled up and rolled up like that, they're gonna take multiple rinses to really start to open up and have character. So I'll give some to our demo cup here. There we go. I'll give this a smell. Beautiful. So rich and nutty and creamy. Lots of good kind of creamy creme brulee sort of notes. Wow, that came out really good. And so when I'm drinking a tea, let's say that this came out not tasting like anything. If I'm going to troubleshoot that process, I would say, well, maybe I didn't use enough leaves. That's the first place. How much leaves should we use? I would say for a very dense tea, enough to cover the bottom. For a very fluffy tea, enough to fill from a third to a half of the gaiwan. And it's going to depend on obviously what type of tea it is, but I think that across the different categories, generally for me, it falls more to having between 5 and 7 grams of leaves, which can look all kinds of different ways. And so if you're not using a scale, that's my metric. It's not about different types of tea. I use different dosages. I use a pretty general same dosage for all different kinds of teas. But when teas are fluffy and diffuse, like a mao cha, like a mao cha sheng pu'er, or an unpressed white tea, like a bai mudan or a shou mei, that are very, very diffuse and fluffy, it'll look like it fills up the gaiwan. And when it's a very, very dense tea that's all buds or is a little brick like this and it's been compressed into something really tiny, it looks like it's just barely covering the bottom. But they're really the same amount of tea. And at the end of the day, the surface area plays into how the tea steeps, but assuming that you're steeping the tea till the end, the same mass of tea is going to deliver the same relative amount of tea juice that you're trying to drink out of it. And so when it comes to dosage for me, the dosage is really a range of mass, but when you're eyeballing it, just know that it can be variable. It could be a tiny, tiny little bit, look like a tiny little bit, it could look like a lot. The least it's going to look like is enough to cover the bottom, unless it's like one little coin or one little brick that's super compressed. And the most it's going to look like is probably about half the gaiwan. Sometimes more. If you're going crazy, if you're doing chaozhou style and you've got a very fluffy dancong and you're just like, whatever, look, the lid's not going to close, I don't care. That's really nice. I will drink all of it. What a shame to throw away all this nice tea. We'll have to drink this later. These different teas that are in this bowl here. We'll just do the old King's Cup. There we go. The rest of this clean. Moving on. Next we had on the list yellow tea. We're trying to go in the same order as we talked about the teas last season. And so, excuse me. Next we have yellow tea. Here's the thing. We don't have any yellow tea right now. We will soon. We'll have a bunch, but we don't have any right this second because it's yellow tea season coming up on yellow tea making and yellow tea picking and processing season. So we don't have any yet. And we don't have any from last year because last year's yellow tea wouldn't be very good right about now. But we have something that kind of looks like a yellow tea. And as the theme that you might be discovering is that leaf size and leaf shape and leaf composition have a lot to do with the way that you steep a tea with respect to the temperature and the time. And so when we're like, oh, well, we don't have a yellow tea, what are we gonna do? I am using this chA. This is snow buds. This is an Emei mountain green tea. And the reason I chose it is because it looks like a yellow tea, because a lot of yellow teas, the most famous yellow teas, the Huangyas and the Maojians and the Junshan Yinzhen are all gonna be these little flat buds where they're just all buds. And they're these little flattened sparrow's tongue buds, just kind of like this chA. And so this is just a really high grade green tea from Emei Mountain. This is by our friends at Ding Ding Sheng. They sent this as a sample. They also made the first tea that I made, which was Suma Feng. And but you can see it's a very different leaf shape. There are lots of green teas that are like this. There are also a lot of yellow teas that are like this. It's probably the most common style of leaf shape that you see for yellow tea specifically. There's different ones. Obviously, we've got leafy yellow tea pressed into a brick out of the Junshan Yinzhen people that they're pressing those. We've got lychee gummy, which has a lot more leaves and is not so many buds and doesn't have this flat uniform shape. But those aren't really like orthodox yellow teas. They're kind of, I think that they're more innovative. And so this is really the classic yellow tea aspect, except imagine the leaves a little bit more yellow. Maybe we can tune the color on this scene to make it look yellow. No, I'm just kidding. We wouldn't do that. But here we go. Into my warm gaiwan. I really don't want to throw this one away. Because this is a sample. We saved a little bit. We have enough to make a little bit. All right, give her a smell. So toasty. People say Sima Feng has fried chicken notes, and I'm getting a little bit of that in here. I guess that's part of the Emei Mountain terroir, fried chicken. And I guess like biscuity, yeasty, toasted notes out of this tea. And like malted milk. Yeah, that's probably the most abundant thing. So let's pretend this is yellow tea. It's all buds. I'm going to, and what do I know about yellow tea? Well, yellow tea is a little bit more oxidized than green tea. That's what makes it yellow tea. That's pretty much it. And it's usually all buds. So I'm going to say, I'm going to want to use a little bit hotter water than with green tea, because one of these other things that these other factors that influences your time and temperature decisions is going to be the level of oxidation. Generally speaking, more oxidized teas can be steeped at a higher temperature. Less oxidized teas are going to be steeped at a lower temperature. And that's because that's the way those teas are going to respond to those different steeping styles, is that you're going to get more of those subtle nuances out of the less oxidized teas at lower temperatures and avoid more of that astringency that you get from green tea and can get from yellow tea as well. And with the more oxidized teas, you want to get more of those robust flavors out and more of those back of the mouth flavors, and that hotter water is going to do that. And it's also going to help to open up the leaf. So this is a little more oxidized than green tea. It's not, it is green tea. But in our scenario, it is a little bit more oxidized than green tea. So I'm gonna use a little bit hotter water than I'd use the green tea. And I'm gonna go ahead and pour the water on top of it, a little bit more robust way of opening this service. Instead of pouring the leaves on top of the water, pouring the water on the leaves, it's a little bit more forward. And just give it a quick rinse. And then, since it's a yellow tea, even if it was a green tea, I'm just gonna wanna get all the last little drippy drips out. Ooh, so satisfying. Mm-hmm. You know what it smells like? It smells like when you're in a tea workshop and they're cooking tea in big woks and processing it, and the tea was just picked and it's all fresh, and you're cooking it, because this is some fresh 2024 spring tea. So that's exactly what it smells like and nothing else. It smells exactly like that. It's a great smell. Go ahead and taste this rinse. Do I always rinse yellow teas? Sometimes. So here's the thing. Yellow teas, you can handle all kinds of different ways. Some yellow teas, I will do that ginger and pow like I did with the red tea. I'll do that ginger and pow and I'll let it open up, and then I'll steep it like that and be a little bit more aggressive with it. This one I'm being, doing a warm steeping to open it up. Oh, it's super light in flavor. So I'm going to use hotter water. This kettle here is a little bit hotter. So, here, I'll use this to rinse it out. A fruit fly literally just flew right into my cup and got itself stuck to the bottom. It was just like it had been planned. I'm gonna use a little bit hotter water here, and I'm going to let it go a little bit longer. And this isn't because it is or isn't a yellow tea. This is because of what this particular tea is doing. At the end of the day, each tea is its own individual tea. It is not actually bound by any kinds of rules or traditions that would apply to other teas of its same type. The types of tea are just convenient ways for us to think about tea so that we can talk about it more precisely and in a more informed way. But they don't define what teas are. So yellow tea is a great example of why we need to treat every tea as an individual and not subscribe to stereotypes about that type of tea, because they are seldom true across the board, especially for yellow tea. But you will be a better tea server for taking each tea as much as possible as its own individual, unique experience and entity, as opposed to trying to place expectations on how it's going to behave based on the rules that it's supposed to follow, because the tea doesn't care. The tea doesn't think of itself as having a type. The tea just is the plant that it is, and it's going to be the way that it is. So obviously this isn't yellow tea, and it is green. Therefore, it makes sense that it is green tea. If this was yellow tea, it would look yellow. It smells good though. I got like piney notes, crisp kind of autumny notes. It's nice. It's actually really nice made that way. Because I've had this one time before and it was all right, but I was a little bit more robust with it. I was a little bit more high temperature with it. And I basically used boiling water right from the very beginning, and it wasn't as good. It wasn't as complex as this. More flavor came out, more nuance came out when I let the water cool. And that's something that, earlier I said in a general sense, right at the beginning, I said in a general sense, more temperature means more flavor, right? But that's not always the case. And so again, not letting yourself be hemmed in by rules or by expectations of how the tea is going to behave. Go ahead and pour some here. We'll just edit that to be more yellow in post. Oh, that's good. You know what? I'm just gonna do one more of this one since we don't have very much of this one. We can do 2 for some of them. I'm gonna go hotter now. Now that I've kind of seen what this tea can do, I want to explore some more of those umami reaches. I'm not afraid of it being bitter. It hasn't shown me any bitterness at all this whole time. And so I'm just going to be a little bit more aggressive with my steeping style. Going kind of long. I've got a nice tight aperture. Also keeping in mind that my water's not boiling, working under the constraint that I have. Sometimes you can't reboil water. Sometimes you got a thermos. You're on a mountainside. There we go. And you have to adapt. So that's another thing when you're doing this, you don't always have control of your temperature. Maybe you don't have control of your time. Maybe the vessel that you're using just drains really slow. Maybe it's some kind of old teapot and it doesn't have a very good filter and it just gets clogged and it just drip drains real slow. Well, you might want to cool your water then because you can't control the time. If you can't control your temperature, you might want to, make up for it by controlling the time in a different way. All right, fairly well. Moving on to white tea. White tea, as has been discussed, is not on the oxidation, or is not defined by its position on the oxidation spectrum the way that you see for green tea and red tea and yellow tea, and to a slightly lesser extent, oolong. And so it can be variable levels of oxidation. Fresh white tea is going to be unoxidized or low oxidation, not unoxidized, but lower oxidation. And aged white tea is going to be partially to fully oxidized. Also, the leaf size changes for white tea pretty radically. So pretty much all of the things that can change that I've talked about in this episode as being what you need to consider for any given tea, irrespective of the type of tea that it belongs to, when you're thinking about time and temperature, all of those are traversed by white tea, where you've got single bud, only bud white teas that are little and delicate like silver needle, all the way to just big floppy leaves like you get with chA. And you get delicate, unoxidized, fresh white tea, all the way to super dark and rich, sweet, aged white tea. And as you can guess, those different teas are going to require different times and temperatures. And if you want a generalization, I'd say, as I've been saying, throughout this episode, the bigger the leaf, the darker the leaf, meaning the more oxidized the leaf, /roasted /fermented, they all make it darker, and they all are going to make it more resilient to hot water. And so when I'm approaching a white tea, let's say I don't know anything about this white tea. It's just got some name, someone gave it to me. It looks light in color, but not super light. It's not green. So I'm gonna say maybe it's middle-aged, maybe it's got a few years of age, but it's not super old yet because it doesn't look brown, which is like aged white tea looks, is brown with kind of golden buds. The buds are still silver. The leaves still have some greenness to them. And it's mostly this gray, silverish color. So I'm gonna say that looks like a middle-aged tea. And I can visually see that there are lots of buds. There's lots of downy white buds in this tea. And so I'm going to I'm going to, and also it's broken off. It looks like it's broken off from a being. So the leaves, there's leaves in there, but the leaves are somewhat broken from that being opening process. So no matter what the leaf size started as, now it's got small to medium sized leaves that I'm dealing with. And that means more surface area. And that means I want to be more delicate with the temperature, with the time than I would be if this was like big ol' beefy leaves. So let me go ahead and this guy. Give this all a rinse. Drink the last of these snow buds. It's really nice. And then get this tea a steepin'. So I got sick of complaining about my water not being hot, so I just re-boil the water, and that's movie magic. And I'm just gonna use this hot water on these leaves. Why am I using hot water? It's just a judgment call that I made, and it's basically based on the fact that I know that A, white tea in general is not likely to get bitter, that B, this is an aged white tea. It has at least some age on it, so it's not likely to have that very chlorophyll-y, they call it the taiyang way, the sunshine flavor. Of the kind of not well cured white tea leaves that you can get from fresh white tea sometimes. And based on the smell of the warm leaves and it's so like honey and blossomy, some kind of squash blossom. Maybe squash blossoms smell bad, I don't know. Very sweet, lots of honey. And also that classic white tea profile, that middle-aged white tea, buddy white tea profile like expected. And again, this is my rinse. I'm gonna leave this off here. Let this one breathe a little bit. This is my rinse and I'm gonna taste it. Just pour myself a little sip of it. So I like where that rinse was based on the heat that I used. And now the leaves are a little bit more open, they're gonna be more receptive. And so that means I can experiment again with cooling my water, but I don't wanna do it too much. I'm just gonna do a little bit because I like that robustness, and it didn't taste like there was gonna be any bitterness. It was just very sweet and rich and viscous. And that's gonna be those leaves kind of holding down the low end of this blend of leaves and buds. And so I'm gonna go ahead and cool my water just a little bit, but not too much. There we go. And again, I can look at the leaves, I can smell the lid. I've decided that even though the particle size is a little small from this, it looks like what's the end of a broken up bean, that I'm gonna treat them more like the large leaves that they come from than a small leafed tea. We got a lot more color this time. Let's go ahead and use this as our representative color cup. The first steeping, the rinse is never gonna do it justice. Here we go. And I'm gonna give this tea a smell. Got some brighter notes, almost like a spicy note, like a cinnamon, like a very light skin of a green apple cinnamon. That honey note's still there. It definitely doesn't seem like it was over steeped. I'm not getting any acid notes coming out. Or even like squashy vegetal notes. It's still this very nectar-like, sweet, very bright infusion. It's really good. And so H white teas are pretty chill as teas go. Fresh white teas are chill too. Most white teas aren't really going to get bitter on you. Maybe some like moonlight white that's just really leafy might get astringent the way that a red tea, an oversteeped red tea can get. But for the most part, the Fujian white teas are going to be pretty chill. For the buddy ones, if you burn them and you scald them and they're too hot, you blow away the fragrance because it just like is too much of a blast of heat, and it just scatters away the fragrance, and you lose that fragrance. And you've got to be a little bit more delicate with them to tease that fragrance out and kind of coax it out. But this is buds and leaves, and so either way you go, you're going to get a pretty balanced infusion. This is a Baimudan white peony, that's what it is. It's a mixture of buds and leaves of white tea from Fujian. I'm gonna drink it. We definitely have to do something with this. I'm not sure what yet, but something. That's hindsight, is what that is. It's a 2020 Baimudan, so it has, coming up on 4 years of age. All right, let's see what happens. Leave it in the hands of the gods. Oh. Last tea. chA. It's also pressed tea. That last one was pressed, but it wasn't densely pressed. It was a white tea. It was a buddy white tea. So it was pretty loosely pressed. You can kind of scrape it off with a knife and get these nice whole leaves. But this is some chA. This is chA. What does it mean? It's fermented tea. Does it have to know it's fermented? No. Some would say this is oolong because that's what it was. Oolong that was stuffed into the skin of a pomelo. Behold, pomelo is like a big grapefruit. It doesn't actually look like a pumpkin. The reason it looks this way is because they scooped out the flesh of this big grapefruit-like citrus. It's actually the ancestor of the grapefruit. And then they twisted it with wire to compress the tea in it. After they filled it with tea, twisted it with wire, and then age it like this. And then it ages and ferments. And this one's from 2016. So this is 8 years old now. And so now it's a chA. It wasn't a chA before. It was an oolong before. And then they put it in a citrus skin and aged it, and now it's a fermented tea. So people will argue about that. They'll be like, no, it's only a chA if it undergoes the Wodoi process. But then other people, also people in China, also people who deal in chA will say, no, if it's fermented, then it's chA. Doesn't matter whether it was fermented on purpose or whether it was fermented right from the get-go. If it's fermented, it is now a chA. It can still also be an oolong. It is a chA that was once an oolong. Don't worry too much about what things are called. Just be present for what things are. So let's be present for this beautiful little pumpkin guy here. This beautiful black pumpkin of joy. And we've got these, they look very, very dense tea. Ooh, it's gonna slide off if I cant this too much. But hopefully you can see this very, very dense, just looks like little chunks of, just like chunks of dirt there that have been carved out of this big pomelo full of tea. And it's 8 immortals is the oolong. So, but I don't know that. I'm just a tea squirrel. So I'm like, what is this? I don't know, but I do know it's pressed and I know it's black. So I'm gonna use hot water because I wanna open it up. When a tea is pressed, if it doesn't dissociate and open up, then it's probably not releasing all of its flavor because some of that leaf mass isn't getting saturated with water, which is why sometimes, including with this tea, you'll want to go in with a tea knife or something while the tea is steeping after it's softened up and expanded and break it up sometimes. That's just how it is. This type of tea really is supposed to be boiled. Yeah, these pomelos and chA in general, most of the time is supposed to be boiled. So that really gets it opened up. But when we're steeping it, sometimes we have to give a little bit of mechanical nudging. So that's a little bonus tip there that is neither pouring technique nor time and temperature. That is just stab the tea. Sometimes you got to do it. But we really want to, get this tea to open up with our pouring and our water. And in order to get a pressed dense tea like this to open up, we want to use hot water straight from the kettle. right onto here, knowing that letting it sit here for a super long time is not in and of itself going to open up that tea very much. You will get it to open up much faster by pouring the water off and then steeping it again. And that second forceful infusion of water being poured over it and it having the chance to dry out and be drained in between and to kind of recoil from that and then being hit with the water again gradually coaxes the leaf open. So you can get a tea to open more sooner with respect to steepings by steeping it longer, but you're only going to get so much of an effect from it. At a certain point, it's just going to really slow down. As the water cools, it's going to really slow down the rate at which it's actually expanding those leaves and steeping that tea. So again, I used hot water. In a perfect world, it would be boiling hot water. I did a pretty long steeping. You saw me talking while I was doing it. It's just slightly bigger, more expanded chunks. Ooh. Smells wild. Citrusy, for real citrusy this time. And super sweet. Smells like some potion. It's like very potion-y. Potion fragrance. All right, let's try the rinse. When I was first learning how to make tea, I would always at least try the rinse. And I encourage you to also. It's good. It's already good. Well, you know, this tea just seems like I'm going to pour hot water on it and let it sit there. Why am I going to do that? Because I know that chA is traditionally boiled. And even if I didn't know that, finding that I'm pouring hot water on it and realizing that it's not really opening up that much is telling me that I need to go hotter and longer, if possible. And so I'm just going to be doing that. And until it shows me, the tea shows me that's like, hey, that's too much heat, that's too much time, by getting bitter or taking on some character that I don't want, I'm just going to follow the tea's signals and pursue this line of steeping style and see what happens. And I'll sit and do this, you know, for 6 or 7 steepings, and then I'll boil it. Then I'll take the leaves and I'll put them in a saucepan and I'll boil them and get one nice rich infusion at the end. And there we go, beautiful. Love the little rainbow of tea colors here. No two are the same. Wow. So this second steeping, it's really coming alive. It's expressing itself, getting more of these like whiskey barrel, oaky notes. Beautiful. So could you experiment with cooling the water down for this tea? Absolutely you could. I'm not doing it now because I like where this is going, and I have my own pre-established relationship with this tea and my own familiarity with this tea, and I'm like, I want that deep, rich flavor that I really love about this tea to come out. But I think everyone should experiment. I've been doing this a long time, like 20 years now. I'm a little bit stuck in my ways maybe, but I think that there's always something to be discovered, and there's no end to that. There's no end to the things that you can discover, even just about one single tea. So I think I want to leave you with the goal is not to try to put the teas into a box and to understand them and to have a formula or a recipe for them. The goal is to really develop a relationship with each tea. Use what you know about the tea, whether that's a lot or a little or nothing at all, and use your senses and your instincts to guide you and your passion. Use your observation. You mostly listen to the tea, taste the tea, smell the tea, and cultivate your own relationship with the tea. That's what we're here for. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.